Trustee Farrar, will you please convene the Committee on Governmental Relations?
Thank you, Chair Kimbell. Will the Committee on Governmental Relations please come to order? It is now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda. Does any committee member wish to remove an item for separate discussion? Hearing none. Is there an objection to the approval of the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. The committee has two action items on today's discussion agenda. The first action item is sponsored state legislation for 2021. The item will be presented by Garrett Ashley, Vice Chancellor, University Relations and Advancement, and Nicole Munoz Murillo, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Advocacy and State Relations. Please begin, Vice Chancellor Ashley.
Thank you, Trustee Farrar. The new year has begun early and in earnest for our state leaders. On January 8th, Governor Newsom presented his budget proposal for the next fiscal year. And on the 11th, the legislature reconvened from its recess. While these actions kicked off the start of the legislative year, we have been working diligently since last fall to ensure that the CSU is in the best possible position to advocate aggressively for the system's budget and policy priorities. The Advocacy and State Relations team organized numerous substantive virtual interactions between legislative staff, the Legislative Analyst's Office, and campuses. CSU staff continued to keep lawmakers apprised of our response to the pandemic and have met with newly elected legislative members as well. Additionally, every year we engage in a process with campuses and Chancellor's Office leadership to assess the need to sponsor legislation. Today, we are recommending one legislative bill proposal for your consideration. Assistant Vice Chancellor Nicole Munoz Murillo is here to provide the details and will also share a few words about our recent advocacy efforts. Nicole?
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Ashley. Since last summer, our office has been engaged with both campus and system leaders to identify potential legislative proposals for your consideration. To review our multi-stage process, in August of each year, the Chancellor solicits ideas for proposed legislation from the Vice Chancellors and campus presidents. For this particular year, Chancellor Emeritus White asked the proposals take into consideration impacts from the pandemic and associated fiscal challenges. Once proposals are submitted, we work with subject matter experts in the Chancellor's office to evaluate them to determine programmatic and fiscal implications, whether there is a clearly identified need, and to assess the program's alignment with system initiatives and priorities. Ultimately, we work to ensure that we have all the necessary information to determine whether the CSU can make a compelling argument to achieve a favorable legislative outcome. Our next steps in the process include consulting with the Chancellor, Vice Chancellors, and Presidents. Given the transition year, we met with both Chancellor Castro and Chancellor Emeritus White. Based on this consultation process, we bring before you one proposal for your consideration. This proposal is consistent with system priorities, responds to our resource needs, and would fund services for which there is significant increased demand because of the pandemic. We recommend that you adopt the College Mental Health Services Program proposal as sponsored legislation for 2021. The goal of the proposal is to direct additional financial resources to public colleges for student mental health services. In November 2004, California voters passed the Mental Health Services Act, which imposed an additional 1% tax on personal income taxes in excess of $1 million. The aim of the funding was to expand mental health services throughout the state to address a broad continuum of prevention, early intervention, and other services to support the state's public behavioral health system. The proposal before you today would allocate ongoing funding from the Proposition 63 Administrative Fund to the CSU, the California Community Colleges, and the University of California to bolster student mental health services. Student well-being and mental health are essential to our system-wide basic needs initiative, which is a critical component of Graduation Initiative 2025. Numerous members of the legislature have raised student mental health as a concern, and expansion of mental health services is also an identified priority of campus and system-wide leadership, the California State Student Association, the Academic Senate, and the California Faculty Association. This legislative idea may sound familiar to some of you, as a related piece of legislation was introduced by Assemblymember Kevin McCarty in 2019. While the CSU supported that bill, it was unfortunately held in the Appropriations Committee. Notably, the 2019 effort was sponsored by the Steinberg Institute, which is a leading voice in Sacramento on mental health generally, and Proposition 63 more specifically. Our team has been engaged with Assemblymember McCarty's office to craft a framework for legislation to be introduced in the coming weeks. The CSU sponsorship of this bill, as well as collaboration with internal partners such as CSSA and CFA, and external partners such as the UC and community colleges, will differentiate this bill's path from the previous attempt in 2019. The timing of this bill could not be more appropriate, with our campuses currently experiencing significant increased demand for mental health services. Additionally, while we are currently living in a time of constrained budgets, pursuing ongoing funding from a steady source outside of the general fund is essential. Notably, the particular fund that we are targeting within Prop 63 is not funding that is distributed to counties and has been underutilized. We believe that we can make the case that multiple millions of dollars can be appropriated to the public colleges on an ongoing basis, which would be welcome financial support to our campuses. I'd now like to provide you information regarding the next steps in the legislative process. As you see on the slide in front of you, there are several key legislative deadlines in the coming months. The first is the bill introduction deadline on February 19th. We anticipate policy committee hearings will occur in March and April, which will be followed by the fiscal committee deadline in May. At the March board meeting, our report will describe bills that may impact the CSU, and I will highlight ones of significance. Before I conclude today, I want to take a moment to offer a few comments about budget advocacy. Throughout the fall, our team worked continuously in Sacramento to prepare for the upcoming year. As Vice Chancellor Ashley mentioned, we organized several engagements between campuses and key legislative staff. In particular, I want to thank San Francisco State and CSU Bakersfield who hosted virtual campus tours for key legislative staff. Budget, policy, and leadership staff were able to meet with campus leadership and learn how the campuses responded to COVID-19, how they are managing the revenue reductions, and how they are planning for several years of expected challenging budget cycles. Students were also able to talk about their priorities and about the challenges that they had faced and the opportunities provided by the primarily virtual environment. I want to specifically thank Trustee Reyes for her moving account about the importance of campus basic needs services and how they make a critical difference to so many of our students in the pursuit of a degree. In addition to these legislative engagements, the CSU also had the opportunity to provide witnesses for several informational hearings. The Senate Select Committee, chaired by Senator Steve Glazer, held a special hearing on the CSU's progress in meeting the goals of Graduation Initiative 2025. We are grateful for Monterey Bay President Eduardo Ochoa, Vice President Provost of Cal State LA, Jose Gomez, and Assistant Vice Chancellor James Minor for highlighting our successes and noting opportunities for further improvement, making the case for the need for continued investment in GI 2025. The Assembly also held a joint hearing between the Budget Committee and Higher Education Committee. Assistant Vice Chancellor Ryan Storm provided a system-wide perspective about the budget and the revenue challenges that we face. All of the information provided during these hearings and virtual legislative visits laid the groundwork for the budget and legislative advocacy to come in the year ahead. Next week, we will hold our annual Advocacy Day. But in light of the virtual circumstances in which we find ourselves, we have dubbed it CSU Advocacy Week. Campus delegations, including students, faculty, and staff, will meet virtually with their elected officials to advocate for our budget request and priorities. Chancellor Castro will also lead a delegation of system-wide leaders to meet with legislative leadership. As both the Assembly and Senate consider the governor's budget proposal and review their own priorities for funding this year, we will be a regular and consistent voice in Sacramento and throughout the state, reminding our legislative leaders of the importance of the CSU for California. Our work in the next few months will be critical, and we will again be working to engage in the collaborative advocacy, which continues to be the hallmark of our efforts in Sacramento. We look forward to sharing updates on those advocacy activities at our March meeting. Trustee Farrar, that concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Right. Well, thank you, Garrett and Nicole, for your most thorough presentation today. And thank you for all you do, all your advocacy work, and for all of those involved. We sincerely appreciate it. All right. Any questions?
Chair Farrar, I move the approval of the proposed sponsored legislation. Support for mental health services is very helpful to our students and very much in alignment with the priorities of the faculty as expressed by the statewide academic senate. So I move to approve.
All right. Are there any other questions before we go ahead? So we have a motion this is for the sponsored state legislation for 2021. It is an action item, as we know, before the Committee on Governmental Relations, and we do have a motion. Is there a second? Second for committee members?
Second. And there are some
Okay.
questions, Deborah. I see there's questions.
Oh, all right, great. Okay, sorry, got ahead of it. Well, we have the second, and then we can take the questions and have the discussion, okay? So let me look at, there we go. All right, our first question, Larry Adamson has a question.
Vice Chancellor, you mentioned your upcoming advocacy week that you're going to have. You mentioned that administration staff and faculty are included. Could you explain to me what the alumni's role might be?
Sure, Nicole?
Absolutely, and that the alumni are absolutely also a part of it, and I should have mentioned that, so forgive me for not doing that. We have had ongoing stakeholder meetings, and the John Poley from the Alumni Association will be participating in the Chancellor's delegation when we meet with legislative leadership.
All right, thank you.
Trustee Adamson, I would also add that the system-wide alumni have created an advocacy committee and are just now forming and beginning to discuss ways they can support us in Sacramento through advocacy efforts. So we'll have more to report throughout the year.
Yes, thank you. I'm well aware of that, and that's why I asked the question.
All right, Crystal has a question too. Trustee Ray.
Hello. Thank you all for having such a wonderful sponsored state legislation. As a student with basic needs, I'm so excited to be taught to hopefully approve it. So I did have a question, and especially with regards to public comment that was said today. So how many, if this bill were to be passed, how many counselors and staff do you think will be able to hopefully fund, or what kind of programs that you think that we can do to expand mental health services with this bill?
Thank you for the question. So it will be determined upon what the final appropriation amount is. And we are going to try to find that sweet spot. We want to be able to make the case for as much funding as possible. At the same time, to hire about 23 or 24 mental health counselors. I think it costs about $3 million or so.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I think I might be a little bit off on that, but I think that's about right. But the intent is that we would be able to hire new counselors as well as expand additional services.
Thank you so much.
All right, and see Trustee Kames, Mariana has a question.
Actually, I just wanted to take a quick moment to say how thankful I am just, for all the work that Vice Chancellor Garrett Ashley has been doing, and Nicole, and, just having really important conversations like this, and even pulling from, like Crystal says, some of the public comments made this morning about the urgency for mental health counseling and for supportive services. So I also wanted to thank those students who took the time out of their day, work and school to come and make public comments this morning. So thank you so much. And thank you to the Chancellor's office staff for really making this a priority.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. It appears there are no further questions or comments, and there has been a motion and a second to approve the items. And at this time, Ms. Kiss, could you please take a roll call vote and committee members unmute?
Thank you, Trustee Farrar. Trustee Abrego.
Aye.
Trustee Arambula.
Aye.
Trustee Fagan. Trustee Fagan.
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Farrar.
Yes.
Trustee Kames.
Aye.
Trustee McCrory.
Aye.
Trustee Reyes.
Absolutely, aye.
Trustee Sebelius.
Of course.
Trustee Simon. Chair Kimball.
Yes.
And Chancellor Castro.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Trustee Farrar, the motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Kiss. The item is approved. All right, moving on. The second action item is the federal agenda for 2021 through 2022. The item will be presented by Vice Chancellor Garrett Ashley and Jim Gelb, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Federal Relationships. Garrett, could you please begin?
Thank you, Trustee Farrar. Federal programs and resources represent critical investments in CSU students, institutions, and research, particularly in this time of pandemic crisis. While the CSU does not receive general fund dollars from the federal government in the same way we are funded by the state, federal funds for minority serving institutions, student aid, and research are all vital to our success. Moreover, our students and campuses have received critical federal resources in response to the ongoing pandemic, most recently through significant relief legislation passed at the end of December. Today, we present to you the proposed 2021-22 federal agenda. This agenda is similar to those in the past, but with some important areas of increased emphasis. For example, the CSU has long been a leading proponent of supporting Dreamers and of restoring the purchasing power of the Pell Grant, consistent with the broad CSU goals related to inclusivity and achieving our graduation initiative goals. The onset of a new administration and Congress will provide new opportunities to advance these important objectives. Assistant Vice Chancellor Jim Gelb will now provide additional detail regarding these issues and outline recommendations for the 2021-22 federal agenda. Jim?
Thank you, Garrett. Before turning to priorities for the new year, I wanted to provide a brief update on the significant legislative package Vice Chancellor Ashley mentioned that was enacted at the very end of December. It included 3 distinct pieces of particular importance to the CSU. First, similar to last March's CARES Act, all 23 of our campuses will be receiving infusions of dollars that can be used for a wide array of pandemic-related needs, including grants to students and to defray expenses associated with lost revenue, technology needs, and faculty and staff training, among others. The legislation also included a separate pot of money that will provide additional flexible resources to Hispanic serving institutions and Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions to help make sure these campuses can best serve their students. All in all, we anticipate that these provisions alone will provide close to $900 million to CSU campuses and students. Second, the Congress enacted final spending legislation for fiscal year 2021, which began on October 1st of last year. Notably, the maximum Pell Grant will be increased by $150 to $6,495 for the upcoming school year. The bill also provides modest increases for most CSU priorities, including for student aid, minority serving, and capacity building programs. Finally, the package also included some helpful changes in the federal student aid realm. The legislation allows for streamlining of the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA form, effective award year 2023-24, which should make more CSU students eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. It will also make Pell Grants available to incarcerated students and to those with prior drug convictions. Next slide. Now to look ahead. Every 2 years, we review and revise our federal priorities in conjunction with the beginning of a new Congress. And in some years, like this one, this update also coincides with a change in the White House. The item before you provides a detailed list of proposed CSU federal priorities for the 117th Congress, or the 2021-22 session. This slide summarizes them very briefly into 6 broad categories. We are recommending focusing on the same 6 categories we prioritized last session, with just a few minor adjustments to the details. First, aid programs like the Pell Grant, which benefits over 230,000 CSU students to the tune of over $1 billion per year. Next, preparing students for college covers, for example, pipeline programs like Gear Up and TRIO, where our campuses partner with local schools on college readiness. The third bullet, fostering degree completion for California's diverse population, encompasses subjects like protecting our Dreamer students and support for programs that help build capacity at Hispanic serving institutions and Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions. Next is educating students for tomorrow's workforce. This includes, for example, funding for programs that support STEM education and teacher preparation. Solving problems through applied research. In this area, we advocate for robust funding for key agriculture and science programs that our institutions compete well in. And finally, enhancing campus infrastructure, health, and safety. This item covers issues like federal assistance with basic needs and Title IX. This approach gives us a broad blueprint with sufficient flexibility to weigh in on a wide array of matters of interest to the system. In addition, at the beginning of a congressional session, we identified 2 or 3 top priorities from our longer list for additional proactive advocacy efforts. Last term, we highlighted 2 items. First, renewing a critical stream of mandatory funding for HSIs and ANAPESIs, and we're successful in achieving that permanently. Second, we advocated for restoring the annual inflationary Pell increases, which remains on the table. So as we begin the new 117th Congress and Biden administration, we believe it makes sense to highlight 3 top priorities from our broader list. First, placing renewed emphasis on support for Dreamers, including by granting them access to the full range of federal student aid programs. Next, adding a new priority focused on obtaining additional relief and flexibilities related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And third, promoting and enhancing the Pell Grant program by seeking both a significant increase in the maximum grant and a restoration of the automatic annual cost of living increase. These top priorities are all consistent with broad CSU goals related to inclusivity and making continued progress on our graduation initiative, and they focus on areas where there is a critical federal role. As we pursue these goals, 2021 will bring a unique set of challenges and opportunities to the federal relations environment. The recent election is bringing significant changes to the White House and the executive branch. We have a new Congress with very tight operating margins in both the House and the Senate, and several new members of our California delegation. In addition, the CSU must continue to deal with the effects of COVID-19, both in terms of how we operate and its impact on the system's federal priorities. Much of what we do in at least the first half of the year will have to be in the virtual environment. And of course, we have a new chancellor. Outreach will be very important. We've already begun. Chancellor Castro, along with UC President Drake, met last month with members of the Biden Education Transition Team. Chancellor Castro also met with the California Democratic Congressional Delegation, a group that included Speaker Pelosi, and he has connected with several members of the state's Republican delegation. We will continue to use virtual tools to be a resource to policymakers and to advocate for CSU priorities. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, well, thank you to Garrett and Jim. Thank you very much for another really thorough presentation. Are there any questions we can take any questions now. Are there any questions? I see them. All right. All right. Our first question is Romy.
Yes, thank you. I want to draw you to the priorities, and they are listed in our agenda on page 3 or 4. And I'm speaking to the fourth priority, to educate students for tomorrow's workforce. STEM fields and the NSF, the National Science Foundation, are mentioned. As a matter of fact, they're mentioned twice. They're also mentioned in the following priority. However, I would like you to add a third bullet point to the fourth priority. And this third bullet point read that we also support or request that we support a robust investment in the National Endowment of the Humanities. The humanities, in my opinion, deserve our support even more because they're more often under attack due to the moral, societal, and political implication of their art. Furthermore, they also prepare our students for the workforce. The humanities impart critical thinking, writing skills, communication competence, just to name a few. These are essential and lasting skills. They're often called soft skills, which is completely inappropriate. These are essential skills, and they're very much appreciated by prospective employers. The humanities and the arts also provide skills and knowledge that do not only make our graduates more employable, but they also enrich their lives outside of their profession, and they benefit society overall. So I really hope that you add this bullet point to request robust investment or support robust investment in the NEH, the National Endowment of the Humanities. And I don't know if I have to make a motion and we have to vote on it, or whether this is actually quite self-explanatory.
I'm not sure. Garrett or Jim, I think it's self-explanatory. I don't really think we need to make a motion.
One comment I would make is that the list, the bullets in the list are not meant to be exclusive.
Right.
And in fact, we advocate for many programs beyond the ones that are listed in the bulleted examples, over the course of time. And these are cited as areas where, there are a lot of resources available to CSU campuses to compete in, where we find that we're a good voice for that. But I know many from the CSU advocate for NEH and NEA funding, national service funding, things like that, that aren't listed specifically on this list.
I appreciate the comment, but I think the National Endowment of the Humanities is of such magnitude and importance that when you list STEM and the NSF twice, I think they should be at least listed.
Trustee Farrar, I think from a staff perspective, if it's the committee's wish that we add that as a bullet, we certainly can. That's a simple addition, and I think it's consistent with our framework for our approach to federal relations. I defer to General Counsel whether or not that has to be in the form of a formal amendment or not, but I'm certainly comfortable from a staff perspective adding that.
Chair Farrar, I'll just weigh in. The request has been made and staff has indicated that they're willing to add that item. So as long as there's no objection, you could just proceed with that understanding. And I don't see that there's any need to take a formal vote to amend.
And that seems reasonable to me. And I don't think there'd be any objection to that, Romy, at all. So staff will happily add that in about the NEH. All right. Okay, great. All right. Our next question is from Trustee Reynes.
Thank you, Chair. I first wanted to say thank you so much for this wonderful report, especially those top 3 priorities. They're very important to the CSU, especially when we want to support DACA and our dreamers. So thank you so much for those really important priorities. I had a question regarding the point for foster degree completion for California's diverse population. I noticed that we mentioned Latino and Native American as well as Asian American, but how are we, fostering degree completion for our Black students specifically? I know we mentioned it like I'm looking at right now. I know we mentioned it like at the top, but there doesn't seem to be any specific bullet points about how we bridge the gap for our Black students.
Garrett, Jim, does anyone want to take that?
Well, many of the programs that we mentioned are relevant to that.
Yes.
First and foremost, the Pell Grant program. And to the extent that we list a bunch of minority serving institution programs, those are the ones that CSU campuses qualify for. But the reality is when we compete successfully for grants for HSI programs or for ANAPZ programs, those grants are supposed to help all students at the university that are in that situation. Same when we advocate for pipeline programs. I mean, they cut across all racial lines in terms of trying to help cohorts of students that need assistance in closing the equity gaps. So I think there's a lot in there that does apply to Black students as well as all the other categories.
Jim, you might just talk for a second about the distinct funding streams and differences between Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, ANAPZ designated institutions as well.
Right. So there are statutory requirements to be eligible as a Hispanic serving institution or as an ANAPZ institution. Historically, Black college university is a limited category of historically designated institutions, none of which exist in California. There is a separate category that was created in more recent years for a predominantly Black institution, but none of the CSU campuses meet the threshold requirements for that particular category either. But again, the funds that we get for those other programs and Pell funding and all student aid is incredibly important to all of our students who have financial need to help close the equity gaps.
Got it. Thank you so much.
All right. We have a question from Trustee Abrego.
Yes, thank you, Jim, for that report. And it must be exciting right now to be in Washington. I know you have your hands full with the priorities that you listed. One program that Cal State has is the DC Scholars Programs. It's very prestigious, and our alumni are represented in very legislative offices in Washington, DC, and I've been getting some calls from some of our former students and the things that are happening up there. But what can the board do to help support this program, to sustain it, to grow it? It's quite a prestigious and recognized program, which I'd like to generate some larger support for.
Well, I'm going to defer to Vice Chancellor Ashley on some of that, but what I can tell you is that we've certainly had wonderful encounters out there in Washington with the DC scholars and their alumni. Many of them are active in the Young Alumni Program out there in DC, and a former member of my own office teaches in that program, so very proud of it too.
Yeah, Trustee Abrego, thanks for the question. It's not a program that's administered out of our division or the Office of Federal Relations, but I do think that it would be an interesting component of a future presentation by us, or I could certainly talk to my colleagues in the Chancellor's office about providing additional information or presentation to the board in the future.
Well, thank you. I think it would be of interest to the board. The alumni that are participating in that program have very significant positions in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. And it'd be nice to get a full report on the impact of the program.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, the federal agenda for 2021 and 2022 is an action item before the Committee of Governmental Relations. May I have a motion from a committee member to approve the item?
So moved.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. At this time, and there's no further discussion, at this time, Ms. Kiss, could you please take a roll call vote? And committee members unmute.
Thank you. Trustee Abrego.
Aye.
Trustee Rambula.
Aye.
Trustee Fagan.
Yes.
Trustee Farrar.
Yes.
Trustee Kames.
Aye.
Trustee McGrory.
Aye.
Trustee Reyes.
Aye.
Trustee Sebelius.
I say yes.
Trustee Simon. Chair Campbell.
Aye.
And Chancellor Castro.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes as well.
All right. The motion is passed. Thank you, Ms. Kiss. The item is approved. And Chair Campbell, that concludes the business of the Committee on Governmental Relations.
Thank you very much, Chair Farrar.